and today we're talking about the Catholic takeover of hospitals in the United States, and Washington State in particular has been getting a lot of attention lately. Like from the New York Times did an article about Washington State. Valerie, what's going on there? What's the deal?
Well, so hospital mergers are ramping up across the country. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that changes in technology are making it hard for little independent hospitals to survive.
Yeah.
The other is that actually with some of the mandates of Obamacare, that is driving changes. They need increased efficiencies, et cetera. And the problem is that what you have is these independent, small secular hospitals looking for a merger partner who can sustain this massive infrastructure of technology, et cetera. And oftentimes those big umbrellas that they're merging with are Catholic hospital systems or Catholic healthcare systems. And then what happens is that the Catholic bishops have these mandates called the ethical and religious directives, and those get imposed on the system as a whole. So somebody who's been going to a secular hospital like Swedish, for example, in Seattle, which is now affiliated under Providence, may have no idea that all of a sudden the Catholic bishops have a say in what healthcare options they have.
This is sort of the problem. We have some of these ethical and religious directives here, and the thing we have to talk about these ethical and religious directives that you have to understand is this isn't a document written by doctors. This is not a medically informed doctors. It's not written by women. It's written by a bunch of celibate priests sitting, at the archdiocese, hashing this stuff out.
I mean, what you have to understand from my perspective is that the word ethical should be in quotes.
That's really it, and there's a lot here. One of the things that we talk about is abortion, and they say in cases of extrauterine pregnancy, no intervention is morally licit, which constitutes a direct abortion. So one of the big things that is clear about Catholics, about the Catholic Church, is they're very anti-abortion, as we talked about in the last segment. So when a secular hospital becomes a Catholic hospital, they stop doing abortions, and they have very strict rules about that.
Swedish Hospital in Seattle went through this incredibly elaborate process to try to protect their right to do emergency abortions. There aren't that many abortions that are actually done in a hospital setting, and when they are done in a hospital setting, it's typically because there's something medically very wrong with either the woman or the fetus or both.
Right.
And so the kind of crazy dancing on heads of a pin theological solution at Swedish, I think, is that a woman has to be wheeled into a building where there's a clinic that isn't controlled by the Catholic Providence oversight.
Right.
The fetus gets an injection that stops the heartbeat, and then once it's a dead fetus, then they can kind of be wheeled back into the hospital in order to have the rest of the procedure done.
Are you kidding?
That is utterly ridiculous. I can't believe in 2013 we have to do this in hospitals. Why should we even have to make dumb workarounds like that? It's just so silly. Under
the circumstances, I can't think that this doesn't raise the chance of infection and complications if you have to truck a patient around in order to get around these quote-unquote ethical procedures.
I don't know if it increases the complication rate.
Okay.
I think they're probably handling that pretty carefully, but the bigger question is, do we want theology dictating our healthcare options, or should they be dictated by our own conscience as individual patients and by medical science?
So you say that, in the case of hospitals, when they do abortions, it's not going to, deciding an elective procedure. This is when they do abortions in hospitals, they're usually about something has gone seriously wrong and the life of the patient is actually the problem now.
Over 90% of abortions are done during the first trimester. The majority of abortions are done literally when the gestational sac is something that is slightly smaller than a chicken egg. And those are outpatient procedures. They're simple procedures. They take 5 to 10 minutes, literally, once everything is set up. They're highly safe, so there's no reason for that to happen in a hospital setting. So but the other challenge here is that we're not actually just talking about hospital mergers. We're talking about healthcare systems.
Right.
And the number of hospital beds, because of changes in medical practice, is going to be decreasing in the coming years. There are hospitals that are going to be going out out of business. And so these healthcare systems, including the Catholic healthcare corporations, which they call Catholic healthcare ministries,
right.
And that is significant because that's how they view it, they're buying up physician practices, outpatient physician practices across the state and laboratories. So there are all kinds of medical services, a full range of medical services that are coming under the control of the Catholic bishops without people even noticing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is we can talk about things happening in clinics, but because of the new procedures and the things that happen, even these clinics and these smaller facilities are becoming parts of these, of sort of the Catholic machine here. Now, one of we're going to get a bunch of these, arguments. And so one argument we're going to get is, why can't you just go to a different hospital?
Well, that's the really big problem here in Washington State, and that's why all of a sudden a whole bunch of people are sitting up and paying attention. Because if all of the proposed mergers go through this year in Washington, 47% of hospital beds in Washington State will be under some kind of religious control. Currently, approximately a third of hospitalizations in Washington State are under the control of some kind of religious authority.
Right.
And what's shocking is that if those mergers go through, by the end of the year, the hospital, there are counties in Washington State, a number of counties that will have 100% of their beds controlled by religious institutions. So that includes Whatcom County, Skagit County, Snohomish, Clallam, Jefferson. Right now in Pierce and King County, about a third of the beds are controlled by religious institutions. That would go up to just under 50% or just around 50% in even our most populous counties. So
there's going to be places where a Catholic hospital is your only choice.
It's your only choice. And a lot of times people, you choose a hospital because it's close. You choose a hospital because your doctor says this is where I deliver babies. People don't even know to ask the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, I was really astounded to hear you list Snohomish as one of the counties that could potentially have 100% hospitals. I live in Snohomish County. It doesn't seem like the kind of place where this could happen, and I'm sort of astounded that this has snuck through to the point where it is now. I don't know. Have you heard of any situations in Catholic hospitals where patient care was actually altered from what would be the normal medical practice because of the Catholic doctrine?
There's a website that's now devoted to this problem in Washington State called Catholic Watch. There's also a National Merger Watch organization. But one of the stories that came to the attention of the woman who runs Catholic Watch recently was a Seattle couple who were traveling through the Midwest. She went to an emergency situation that turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy. The hospital that was closest that she ended up in was a Catholic hospital, and they told her that she needed to have her fallopian tube removed, which and we're talking about how to go about this surgery, right? When it turns out in a non-Catholic setting, all you actually need to do is inject something into that fallopian tube to destroy the developing embryo, and then a woman is left with her fertility intact. But for the Catholic hospital, you can't just inject something in that kills the embryo because that's a direct abortion. And instead, what they're willing to do is to indirectly kill the embryo by removing the whole fallopian tube, which actually then puts the woman's fertility at risk.
That just seems... who do they think they're fooling? I hope they don't think they're fooling God with that one, because... Well, you're gonna pull out the organ where the fetus is living, but not do anything to the actual fetus. What do you think the outcome of that's going to be? One
of the problems here isn't just that I'm reading about, isn't just that they won't do these things. It's about control of information. If I remember right about that story when Becky was telling me about it, the patient had to Google had to Google what she was going through, and she found out by reading through Google that she didn't have to have her whole fallopian tube removed. So not only do they not do these things, but they won't tell you that they don't do these things, and they make their quote unquote moral alternatives sound like the only option.
What's terrifying for us as patients is that you trust your doctor to give you science-based, evidence-based information about what your best options are when you come in. You're in a completely vulnerable situation.
Yeah.
It's not a patient's job to know what the latest and greatest is in terms of medical procedures. And yes, the problem is that they don't even have any obligation to disclose the fact that there are better treatment options in a secular hospital.
Yeah. So getting something a little less, dire than abortion, we can just talk about contraception. In the ERD, it says Catholic health institutions may not promote or condone contraceptive practices.
So to me, that's the opposite of moral, right?
Yeah.
It's immoral.
Yeah.
What we have so much information that shows that when children come into the world intended, women are able to do both preconception health care. They're able to plan their finances. They're able to then kind of have good health practices during the first few weeks of pregnancy that increase the child's health. Their finances end up better. Those children are less at risk for a whole host of social problems. So what this Catholic directive does is it actively creates harm in society. But again, people might say, well, in a hospital setting, that's not a big deal. Most people don't get their contraception from a hospital setting. Here's why it's a big deal. The best time to do a tubal ligation is often right after giving birth. And if a woman goes into a Catholic-controlled hospital and she's ready to be done having her children, she has to have a whole separate surgical procedure. She can't just have it done at the time of the delivery or at the time of the C-section.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we now know that the very best, most effective contraception on the market is long-acting reversible contraceptives like IUDs and implants. The IUDs are actually quite compatible with breastfeeding, and the CDC recently said that we should be increasing offering women an IUD it's called a post-placental or postpartum IUD that goes in during the first 24 hours after a woman gives birth. That can go in within 10 minutes of the placenta coming out, actually. And then that totally reduces the risk of her ending up with back-to-back pregnancies, which again have health risks for the mother and for the second child. So in a Catholic setting, women aren't even going to learn that this is the new latest greatest medical practice standards.
Yeah, and what also really struck me is that this document also restricts the ability, or in many cases eliminates the ability for doctors to offer reproductive technology, essentially fertility treatment.
That seems idiosyncratic to me. Why wouldn't they do that?
Because they believe in the sanctity of the Marriage Act, what they call the Marriage Act, which means sex,
wow.
And that it is for the purpose of procreation and procreation only. And the statement in the ERDs is, quote, reproductive technologies that substitute for the Marriage Act are not consistent with human dignity.
What?
That's very... One, euphemisms are great for jokes. They're great for hanging out with your friends. But if you have to use euphemisms in the medical setting where it leaves a question as to what you actually mean, that can't be good. That can't be moral.
Right. You mean the Marriage Act?
The Marriage Act,
right.
Yeah. Wow. And so specifically with fertility treatments, if I remember right, this is not something I know much about, they fertilize several embryos and they plant several of them hoping that one takes. Is that the idea?
Well, that's not the only problem with it from a Catholic perspective, right? I mean, that is one of the things that they are morally opposed to, because those little fertilized eggs are people, don't you know?
Right.
But even though I have to digress and say that even though God himself aborts 60% or more
right.
of those fertilized eggs, that most of them simply flush out onto a woman's panty liner when she has her next period. But the issue is that they kind of have elevated sex to this sacred status. And part of what this means is that gay and lesbian couples, also don't have access to reproductive services.
There's two things there. One, I like to say a lot is, these are organizations that have at their heart, when you take away the dancing, when you take away all of the culture, what you have are hierarchical structures for social control. And if you want to control people, control how they eat, control how they relate to other people, and control sex.
Yep.
And you have control of people. But the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is very important, especially in Washington State, is that is because the Catholic Church is against the whole LGBT idea. And so what kind of treatment is a trans person going to expect when they go to a hospital?
No, they explicitly exclude treatment for trans people. And already couples who are married, queer couples who are married in Washington State have been refused the dignity of being acknowledged as married couples.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Is that not illegal?
Well, we're going to find out, aren't we?
Yeah, I suppose.
Oh, man.
But my fear in this case is, one, they won't do trans therapy. But the other thing is, what happens if you're a trans person and you get into an accident and you get airlifted to a Catholic hospital? What kind of care can you expect under these circumstances where they see you as less of a person or a person in violation of the strictures of God compared to other patients?
I think that's one of the scary things, again, for patients, because when you're a hospital patient, when you're that sick, you are so vulnerable, and you don't want to do anything that would offend your medical provider, right? I mean, I was recently had an outpatient surgery in a clinic that somebody reassured me that they were great practitioners because they were good Christians, and they had, I saw the Bible in the waiting room, and I had to kind of reassure myself that there are lots of people who can divorce kind of evidence-based medicine from their Christian beliefs, which are kind of faith-based. But I felt like, oh my gosh, I hope my Freedom from Religion Foundation thing on my computer didn't get noticed, or because what if, right? I'm going under anesthesia.
Yeah.
I personally, that happened to me last year. I was hospitalized, and I went to a Catholic hospital, and I was being hospitalized while this show was on the air. I was being admitted. So I'm doing what process of the show that I can do. I'm checking the websites. I'm getting things ready, because otherwise I'm just going to sit there mewling in pain. And then I realized that I'm doing this in a Catholic hospital, and I'm about to be admitted. And it's very clear. Everybody around me, we're talking about Ask an Atheist. We're talking about what I've missed. And then they go, what are your religious practices? And I have to say, explicitly none. I am actually an atheist activist. I said it straight out, and fortunately, I think I received, good care. But that was a concern of mine. How am I going to be treated? Do they know, oh, there's an atheist activist in a Catholic hospital, let's send a bunch of people after him to see what he can do?
What I think is also, I've worked in hospitals before, and what I also think is kind of disturbing about this whole thing is that it really restricts the way doctors and other healthcare workers can practice their profession. Because I think most people who go and work at Catholic hospitals are probably not Catholic. That's where the jobs are.
That's the thing, is most of these doctors aren't Catholic at Catholic hospitals.
The doctors aren't Catholic. The other thing that's really twisted is that the funding isn't Catholic. People don't realize that less than 5% of the money that flows through Catholic healthcare institutions actually comes from the Catholic Church. Most of it is public dollars. They are administrating our taxpayer dollars and then using our taxpayer dollars to essentially fund their ideology. So
these hospitals, which are explicitly religious and won't do things specifically because of religion, are publicly funded. They're publicly funded.
They're publicly licensed to serve the general public. Most of the practitioners are not Catholics. It's that the Catholic Church is the administrator of our funds and our services. And so what they're actually doing mostly is spending Medicare dollars, Medicaid dollars, county appropriations. They get federal dollars allocated even through the 1946 Hospital Survey and Construction Act that allow them to get capital campaign funding. They get tax-exempt government bonds, and then most of the rest of the funding comes from insurance payments and investments. So incredibly little of what's flowing through those Catholic hospitals is actually provided by the church.
I'm not a lawyer. I don't know much about this stuff, but I just can't help but think that there's an establishment problem here. I really can't.
Yeah.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about Catholic hospitals and how they affect you.